What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for coming back and joining me on season 2 of the Aston Villa rebuild. If you were with us for part 1, you would have seen that in our first attempt at the Premier League as boss of Aston Villa, we managed to get ourselves a 4th place finish. That qualified us for the Champions League, and now we have pushed forwards. It's the 1st of June 2024, and that means that season 2 is complete. Let's kick off our roundup of Season 2 by showing you all of the transfer activities that happened at the club. Now, obviously, coming out of Season 1, we did have a good transfer kitty to go out and improve the squad, but also there was the option to cut away some of the deadwood that was at the club, and also some of the players that we probably looked at as ones that we could improve. So starting off in the first section of the transfer window, which is the 9th of June to the 1st of July, the first of the big name players to leave the club was actually Tyrone Mings, former England international, kind of coming to the end of his days at the club. Wasn't getting the game time that he wanted, asked to leave the club. Watford came in with a bid. They paid us £16.5 million. We took the money and decided it was time for Mings to be moved on. The next player to leave was Wesley Moraes. He's a player that obviously was in the Villa squad originally, got a bad injury, then he couldn't find his place, went through a couple of managers, came back to us after a loan spell at Levante, wanted to move on. We've allowed him to go to France. He has joined Lille. We managed to recoup £4.4 million for him. We had Arjan Reiki go out to Exeter on a free transfer. Then Leander Dendoncker. Now, this is a confusing one. Again, wasn't getting game time. Didn't really know how to get him into the system because he was playing in the same position as Douglas Luiz and John McGinn. Kind of become a little bit unhappy at the club. Wanted to move on. So we various points across the season tried to ship him out. The club valued him at £20 million. We had a deal on the table worth around 12.5. The club wouldn't take it. They wanted more. And then come the end of the season, they decided that 7.75 million from Fulham was a decent amount to move him on. So he has left the club. And then the next player that has left is Kane Kessler-Hayden. He has gone to Brentford. They came in with a £9.5 million bid. Now, obviously, this one might have caused a little bit of unrest with the fans. And in real life, I don't know how good of a prospect he is. In the game, I do think he has got something about him. But the money that they were offering said to me that we should just cash in now as we're trying to build a squad that can improve on 4th place in the league. So that meant that we started to rebuild for Season 2 by purchasing players. And the first place that we went to for the first 2 players was Red Bull Salzburg. The first player that we bought in was Fernando. He's a 25-year-old Brazilian, now valued at 31 to 40 million pounds. We had an initial outlay of 13 million rising to 16.5, and you can see that he has everything that we need, both as an attacking midfielder coming in from the left, can also play behind the striker, and is also listed as a striker himself. He has good dribbling, finishing, first touch, pace of 17, acceleration of 16. So he's a player that we're going to look to get involved early and often, and hopefully he can help us to start building wins as we go through the season. The next player we signed was Strahinja Pavlovic, another player from Red Bull Salzburg, now valued at 17.5 to 22 million pounds. Comes in as a solid centre-back option and was one of the reasons that we didn't mind allowing Tyrone Mings to move on from the club. We only paid 8.5 million, rising to 12.25, so he could be a cheaper option than Tyrone Mings, but I think it is money well spent on that player. The next player that we bought in was Danilo, a defensive midfielder or midfielder centre who has come to us. I don't think he came from Palmeiras, did he? Oh, he did. He came straight from Palmeiras. A really good wonder kid in this game. One we know we're going to be able to pick up. I mean, if we look again, we signed him for £20.5 million. He's now valued at 38 to £50 million. If we hit the little wanted tab here, you can see that he's already wanted by Real Madrid. So that shows you what kind of player we have signed. And it's another reason why Leander Dendoncker was allowed to move on, because even if Dendoncker wasn't going to be playing in that position, we know we were going to get Danilo in to fill that position. And the final player in this section of the transfer window is probably the biggest risk of the rebuild, we have gone out and spent the money on Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, and nobody doubts Ox's ability. It's all about the injury proneness. We know in real life he struggled to stay fit. He would have been a bigger part of Liverpool's team had he have been fit, but the obvious is that he doesn't stay fit for long enough. I do think he's the kind of player that we need to kick on, and certainly in season 2 he had a big impact when he was playing, because he's that type of player that is a world-class player on his day, but as I said, the injuries have held him back a little bit, so we're going to give him the opportunity to get the first team football he wasn't at Liverpool, and I think 25 million rising to 30 could be well spent if we learn to just manage his game time, try and keep him off of the operating table and get him into the first team. So that's the first part of the transfer window complete. We then move into the second part, which is after the 1st of July, and there is a few more players that left the club. So Brad Young went to Empoli, Ashley Young went to Malaga. We let Bertrand Traore go to Everton for £4.8 million. Now this is a deal, didn't know whether to do it or not, because obviously Bertrand Traore has got pace to burn. He's also a tricky player out wide. Was he going to get in the starting lineup? That was the real thing that made me take the money. I thought that if we could sell him on, we've got similar types of players at the club already. Maybe we could add 1 or 2 players that are younger and try and develop them instead of being stuck with Bertrand Traore. We also had Keenan Davis go out on loan to Stoke and Frankie Ealing go to Dorking. So the final 4 players to join the club in this part of the transfer window. Ludwig Augustinsson was actually already at the club. We had a deal in place where it was a loan that converted into a permanent deal. We paid Seville £8.5 million, I think it was. Oh no, 3.8, sorry, I don't know where I saw 8.5. And I think £3.8 million for Augustinsson is actually a bargain. We had a little look at the players that are available that could play in the positions that he could play. And there wasn't anybody who was nearly as versatile at his age of 30, with the experience that he brings, having already played first team football for Villa. We just thought it was a no-brainer to go out and complete the deal. We then signed Charlie Setford. Now, this was one, he's just a young goalkeeper that we're going to look to bring through. Obviously, we start the game off with Emi Martinez. He isn't going to be going anywhere. But in terms of cup games, rotation options, I think Charlie Setford could be a player that in the future may be worth more than this 1.8 to 5.8 million pounds that he's currently valued at. We then signed Bobby Clark, who is formerly of Liverpool, for £1.2 million. Another player who can play through the middle of the park. He can play wide left, wide right, can play up front, and also play as an out-and-out central midfielder. Very much one for the future at the age of 19, and I think even if it don't work out, we're going to be able to sell him on for much more than what we have paid for him. And the final player that we bought in, and this one was done in August, is Lucas Martinez Quarta. He is a centre-back. He's Argentinian, 28 years old. We bought him from Fiorentina. He's by far our best defender, and I think that link-up with Emi Martinez is really going to benefit the club. He's a player that should really elevate the whole of the defensive line, and again, it's one of the reasons that we allowed Tyrone Mings to leave the club. So, with the transfer business halted in August, it meant that there wasn't any money to spend in January. We didn't really need to spend too much money because the way the finances are structured at the club is a little bit crazy. They're allowing us to go out and spend millions and millions of pounds despite the finances not looking too healthy. So we decided that we only needed this one transfer window to really improve the squad. The players that we bought in, the likes of Quarta, Ox, they are going to elevate the club to that next level, hopefully, and we can do it without having to spend hundreds of millions of pounds. And if we can just get that little bit closer to Manchester City, I think that, yeah, we can have a really good go, certainly at finishing 3rd or 2nd. I don't know if we can get close enough to Manchester City. But with the transfer money that we have spent, I feel that we are as good as we can be heading into the new season. Looking at the finances, you can see exactly what I was talking about. This is part of the reason why Aston Villa is a little bit of a crazy club to manage. Now, looking at this, it's very alarming. £91.5 million in the red. The club insist that that is fine, that we can continue to spend. There is £53.6 million in the transfer budget going on into next season. Now, we are only at the 1st of June 2024, so I do believe there might be some Premier League money and possibly Champions League money to come into the club. which is the reason they are so confident that we can go out and spend all that money, even though we have a £91.5 million negative balance. I have to admit, I have kind of balked at signing any players, certainly in January, because I didn't want to put that even further into the red. And I'm not 100% convinced that the club actually know that it's going to be okay. If we're projected to make enough money to cover it, that's fine. But I don't want to be putting it to the point where we can't sign players further down the line and it halts the rebuild process because we haven't been clever enough to hold a little bit back in this season. So that's what we're going to do. There is £53.6 million available to us to spend. Again, I'm going to very much wait and see what happens, see what players we can move on for next season and what we can do in the transfer market, and then basically with what money comes in, we'll have a look at what happens in terms of any players that join the club and if we need to move faces on to generate funds to bring other players in. Looking at the wage budget, £2.9 million available to spend. We are spending £2.5 million. So if we were to go and spend £53 million, we could literally chunk that £400,000 on 2 players if we wanted to start messing about with how much the club are paying players. At the moment, they do seem to have a wage ceiling of around £100,000, which is not too bad for a Premier League club that has just finished 4th. But it does mean that if we spend all that money, I'm really not too sure what's going to happen in terms of the finances going forwards. Let's give you a sneak peek then of what has happened in Season 2. We can see that we have finished second in the Premier League behind Manchester City by 5 points. We were knocked out in the UEFA Champions League at the group stage. We only got 9 points. We needed 10 to qualify, which led us into the Europa League, which as you can see, we finished runners-up. We got knocked out in the quarter-finals of the FA Cup by Manchester City, and we were knocked out in the 4th round of the Carabao Cup by Arsenal. But before we break the competitions tab down just that little bit further and go into a bit more depth, let's have a little run through the club vision and show you what has happened in terms of the board and the supporters. So starting off on the club vision page, see our job security is untouchable. After a 4th place finish and a 2nd place finish in the Premier League, the board are obviously convinced we are the right person to take the club forwards. Looking at the actionable objectives, work within the wage budget is good. We're on course for that. Grow the club's reputation. Finishing 4th, then 2nd in the Premier League is always going to do that. Getting knocked out in the Champions League group stage probably wouldn't have helped, but it meant that we got through to the final of the Europa League, which would have helped. In terms of informational objectives, 1-year contracts for players over the age of 34, 2-year contracts for over 32s, 3-year contracts for over 30s, and 4-year contracts for first team players. So not being judged on any of that, but that is what the club expect of us. So the 5-year plan going forward for the current season, they wanted to be competitive in the Champions League. We passed that. They wanted to reach the last stages of the Europa League. We passed that, reaching the final. Record a Premier League top half finish. Well, we went better than that. We beat last season's 4th place by finishing in 2nd. Reached the last stages of the FA Cup. We passed on that too. And then reached the last stages of the EFL Cup, which we failed because we were knocked out quite early on. Looking at the board feedback then, this is compiled by Christian Perslow, who is chairperson at the club. They have scored us an A-. To summarise, the board are delighted with the leadership qualities we are demonstrating. And the board cultures, they want us to play entertaining football, do not sign players over the age of 28, sign players under the age of 23 for the first team, and play high tempo pressing football. So we got pleased for the first one, delighted for not signing players over the age of 28, very pleased with players under the age of 23 for the first team, and pleased for the high tempo pressing football. Notable highlights in this section: board are pleased that the team challenged for the Premier League title this season, very pleased with the positive atmosphere in the changing room, and pleased with the convincing 3-0 aggregate win over Porto in the Europa League semi-final 2nd leg. They were disappointed about a defeat against Brighton, disappointed about a defeat against Southampton, and disappointed about losing in the Europa League final. You can see that we lost against Chelsea. Switching over to the supporters part, supporters are a little bit harsh, giving us a B-. Play attacking football, they're only satisfied. Play entertaining football, they are pleased. Play high tempo pressing football, pleased. Get the better of Birmingham if we play them, reserving judgment. Get the better of West Brom if we play them, reserving judgment, and get the better of Wolves if we play them, reserving judgment. Record a Premier League top half finish, they were pleased we passed on that, finishing second. Notable highlights: very pleased with the highly impressive 5-0 dismantling of Watford. Delighted to challenge for the Premier League title instead of achieving the previously outlined objectives. Pleased with the convincing 3-0 aggregate victory over Porto in the Europa League semi-final second leg. Disappointed about the game against Brighton. Disappointed against the defeat against Southampton. And disappointed about losing to Man City. And that there, I think, is just an indicator of how far the club has come forwards, finishing fourth and then finishing second, and they are now disappointed that we are losing to Manchester City. Let's go back to the competitions tab then and start to break down everything that has happened across season 2. If we start off on the far right hand side and work our way left, you can see in the Carabao Cup we were knocked out in the 4th round by Arsenal, and that was what caused us to have failed getting to the last stages of that competition. In the FA Cup we were knocked out in the quarter-finals by Manchester City, the only team to have finished above us in the league, so obviously running into them in the FA Cup was not ideal. Now we're going to go through these two together. So in terms of the Champions League, we played in a group with Inter, by Leverkusen. If we go to the group stages or groups, let's break it down a little bit further. Where was our group? Here we go. So in terms of Group C, you can see that we played with Inter, by Leverkusen and Shakhtar Donetsk. Inter topped the group by playing 6, winning 4, drawing 1, losing 1 and getting 13 points. Bayer Leverkusen played 6, won 3, drew 1, lost 2, 2 goal difference and 10 points. And then we played 6. We won 3 of the games, beating Shakhtar 2-0, Bayer Leverkusen 4-2 and Inter Milan 3-0. But we lost all of the away games after winning all of the home games by losing 4-0 to Inter, 3-0 to Bayern and 3-2 to Shakhtar, and that cost us qualification from the group stages of the Champions League, which meant that we ended up in the Europa League. So if we switch over to that and we go into... Did we go into the knockout round? Yes, we did. So in the knockout round of the Europa League, we played against FC Copenhagen. We beat them 5-1 on aggregate to go through to the round of 16, where we faced off against Juventus. Managed to beat Juventus 3-1 on aggregate. Moving on into the quarter-finals, we were drawn against Olympiacos. Managed to beat them quite convincingly 4-0. And then into the semi-finals, where we played against Porto. We beat Porto 3-0 on aggregate and sailed into the final, where unfortunately for us, we came up against fellow English competition, Chelsea, and we lost 3-0. So quite valiant to get all the way to the Europa League final. Fortunately for us, falling at the final hurdle. Let's have a little look at the Premier League then. If we go to the stages first, you can see that we played 38. We won 25 games. We drew 5. We lost 8. We did score 88 goals, which was more than Manchester City had managed to score, but we did concede 36, and that was 4 more than Manchester City conceded. We had a goal difference of 52 and 80 points. We finished 5 behind Manchester City, 3 points ahead of Liverpool, and 10 points ahead of Manchester United. So we were right in the mix all the way until the end. If we look at the profile, Danny Ings scoring 20 goals for us was our top goal scorer. In terms of the average ratings, you had Fernando with a 7.25, Leon Bailey with a 7.24, Danny Ings with 7.21 and Ox with 7.19. In the assists category, we had Lyle Abada getting 9 assists, Felipe Coutinho getting 8 assists, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain getting 8 assists, Leon Bailey getting 8, Buendia getting 8. So those players, those attacking midfield options, were really coming to the fore when it was in terms of contributing to the team with assists. Danny Ings got 5 Man of the Match awards. Let's see how many clean sheets Martinez managed to keep. He managed to keep 14 clean sheets, so he finished tied second. Luca Digne did get 14 yellow cards. Danilo got 11. Leon Bailey getting 4.53 tackles per 90 minutes in, which is quite good for the competition. So we have managed to have a successful season in terms of progression. So we finished 4th last season. We have now finished 2nd this season. And impressively, we have gone from being miles behind Manchester City to closing that gap to 5 points. We obviously have the transfer kitty going forwards. What can we do with it? I'm not too sure. We're going to have to wait and see what the proper money comes in from the Champions League and now finishing 2nd in the Premier League. But overall, what a fantastic season 2 was. Finally, let's have a little look at the squad and see how we have finished Season 2 and what we can do going forwards into Season 3. So let's start off by looking at the assistant report for our best 11. A few strengths and weaknesses on the screen too, but we're going to kick off with Emi Martinez in goal, Luca Dean, Diego Carlos, Ostergaard and Matty Cash as a back four. We then have Danilo, Bailey and Abada in a midfield three, with Coutinho, Buendia just in front of them, and Fernando coming out as our star player and our striker. Now, I'm not too sure that is right. Danny Ings has scored a lot of goals across the Premier League campaign. He scored 20. He is the best player in form, you can see, in terms of strength with 7.70. I think to put Fernando ahead of him might be a little bit premature. I think Fernando could probably play in place of Buendia, who I haven't really been impressed with across the season. But who knows, it gives us options at the top of the pitch. In terms of the wing-backs, we might need some backup for those. We'll have a little look at the other version of the squad planner in just a second. But running through some of the strengths then, best player form is Danny Ings. Player partnership between McGinn and Douglas Luiz. Plenty of room in the wage budget to attract players. Danny Ings scored 20 goals. We have good defensive depth. We have a good defender in Diego Carlos. Danilo represents very good quality in midfield. So does Lila Barda. We have a number of youth prospects at the club, including Amari Kellerman and Ewan Simpson and Tim Iroegbunam. In terms of weaknesses, though, we have communication. Overall depth, so not a lot of depth outside of the first squad still, so even the money that we spent and the players we have attracted to the club still hasn't ruled that out. Teamwork, not the best in terms of teamwork. Leadership still, goalkeeper depth, marking, decisions, one-on-ones, jumping reach, aggression. So a few of them are player stats. I mean, looking at the bottom there, player struggling for form is Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, which is a little bit disappointing because I thought he might have been the player to have pushed the overall team forwards. But I suppose it's one of those where he's been at the club for a single season, has had a few injuries along the way, as we knew that was baked into his £25 million transfer fee. Looking at some of the other ones there, they're things that we can really improve on. We can push forwards. We can try and get players who are better at communicating. We can look at the marking, the decisions, the one-on-ones. We can ask the scouts to go out and try and find players to improve in those positions, I am sure. We have a little look at the other best 11, the one that brings up our youth teams too. So you can see that they go with Emi Martinez, Luca Dean, Diego Carlos, Ostergaard and Cash, Danilo, Bailey, Abada, Coutinho, Buendia and Fernando also. And the youngsters there is Moore, Chrisane, Pavlovic, Smith, Achlak, Iregbunam, Patterson on the left, Wagstaff on the right, Bobby Clark and Simpson, with Aspelin, I can never remember what his surname is, Aspelin Rowley at the top of the pitch. So we do have a decent enough crop of youth players that are coming through, but I do think that if we're going to kick on once again, we're really going to have to spend some money. And now it's weighing up that option of, do we try and sell first teamers for more money than we have already to try and boost that transfer kitty so it's not as bad in terms of the overall balance, because leaving a club with £92 million worth of debt is really not what we wanted to do in the rebuild. We wanted to try and keep it as realistic as possible, and I don't think escalating debts are realistic for a club like Aston Villa. Obviously they keep throwing the money at us, but it's a case of, do we maybe take a season off, try and rebuild with what we have, and then maybe in seasons 4 and 5 go out and spend money. I'm not 100% sure if that's what's going to happen in season 3, but however it works, I'm pretty sure there will be a few transfers come in and a few players go out at least, so we are going to look to try and rebuild and regenerate, even if the money isn't quite right as to what we want. Right, if you're still here at this point of the video, firstly, a big thank you. Secondly, if you could hit the like and subscribe button to help the channel, I would really appreciate it. All the support that everybody has given the channel across the past couple of months has been fantastic. The channel has really started to grow, and I cannot thank you all enough. Before you do go, don't forget to check out the channel, because we have other things such as tactics, Wonder Kids, Let's Plays, tutorials, hints and tips. There really is something for everybody on the channel. If you do find something, don't forget to hit the like button on that too. But for this one, I'm going to wrap it up there. Don't forget to join me on the next season of the Aston Villa rebuild.